morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. It's Monday, August 3rd, 2020, and on this episode, I'm covering a first ever report of cash seizures through asset forfeiture by federal agencies from travelers at airports. It's billions of dollars being stolen from individuals. I've got some quotes from the founders on property rights because I think that's an important foundation to start with. Then I'm going to go through an overview of the report from the heroic IJ Institute for Justice. I've got a couple of examples of how this plays off, how they try to rip people off. And then, of course, I've got two more episodes that I've done. I've done a ton of coverage on asset forfeiture, but I've got two episodes to recommend to you, and I will do that near the end of the episode for those of you who are pretty well aware of asset forfeiture. But if you want to learn what civil asset forfeiture is, this is not the episode to go over that in detail, but I will recommend a few other episodes for you on that. First of all, before getting to all that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. If you check out our show homepage, that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. You're going to find pretty much everything to get you rolling with this program. That is all of the episodes we've ever done for a little bit over 2 years. On individual episodes, I will link to all the references that I'm pointing out. So on this episode, you're going to want to read through this asset forfeiture report from IJ. I've got articles from Reason. I've got links to source material from founders and the like, and of course the other episodes that I mentioned. You can also find all the platforms we're on, for example, live streaming video, YouTube, Facebook, DLive, Twitch and Periscope, archive video versions, Library, BitChute, Brighteon, and BitTube, and then the audio-only podcast editions, Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and elsewhere. I like mentioning all these platforms over and over and over because I expect at some point I'm going to say something in support of liberty that pisses off the wrong people, and I'm going to get kicked off a platform. So I want to make sure you guys are well aware of where you can go. And of course, you find all that information plus our membership program, which you can support us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. A quick hello to everyone out in the live chat while we wait for everyone to get notifications for the live stream. Bob Landry, Patricia Dance, Tim Martin, Bob Brewer, Pro-Life, Pro-Liberty, Madinoff, Lawrence Smith, Michael Lohr, Andrew Nappy, Shane Lackey, Neil, Kyle Reese over on Periscope, and everyone else. I appreciate you spending a little time with me. Thank you so much. I hope you had a great weekend and your Monday is off to a good start. But let's get to this and start out with the great penman of the American Revolution, John Dickinson. And I've got, if you're watching on video, you can see part of this quote, but this comes from what I often cite, his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania in response. This is what made him really well known and famous. He wrote a series of 12 letters in response to the hated Townshend Acts of 1767. His letters were 1767 and 1768. This was, I believe, from the 12th letter in 1768, and the full quote goes like this: "We cannot be happy without being free." I mean, we could end at that, but we cannot be happy without being free. We cannot be free without being secure in our property. We cannot be secure in our property if, without our consent, others may, as by right, take it away. So Dickinson is repeating something that many other founders and old revolutionaries said over and over and over, whether it's John Adams, James Madison, or James Otis, Samuel Adams, and many others, that property rights, the right to own property, whether it's land, a home, goods, or your own thoughts and your own self, this is the basis of freedom. And without it, if someone can just take that property from you, then you really have no liberty. And here's how James Otis put it in 1763, I believe. He says, "No man can take my property from me without my consent. If he does, he deprives me of my liberty and makes me a slave." And for that as our foundation, as property rights, let's see what government is doing to travelers at airports. And we're talking about not necessarily the TSA, but really the DHS and associated agencies like CBP, Customs, and the like. And here from the report from Institute for Justice, which was just released last week, July 30th, jetway robbery, homeland security, and cash seizures at airports. They put it this way: this study is the first to examine airport currency seizures by CBP, ICE, and other DHS agencies. First ever. It is also the first to use data from the Treasury Department's Forfeiture database, the Seized Assets and Case Tracking System, or CCATS, which Institute for Justice obtained only after a multi-year legal battle with the CBP. So they've basically been doing these seizures, recording what they're doing, and then not allowing the public to actually know what's been going on. So you at least can investigate if some lawyers need to sue, whatever it may be, or protect people, or if there's a problem, or if policies need to be changed. They're hiding it. And of course, Patrick Henry told us in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, no one can really be free, and I'm paraphrasing, no one can be free if the actions of their rulers, and that's how he put it, the actions of their rulers are concealed from them. And this is what Customs has been doing for quite a long time. So in the report, they say Jetway Robbery finds that airport currency seizures by CBP and other DHS agencies are a large and growing phenomenon. Over a period of 17 years, DHS agencies seized more than $2 billion across more than 30,000 seizures. The amount seized year to year also trended upward over that period. So we're getting towards multiple billions of dollars as of 2016. And mind you, we're only going back to 2000. So we're well over $2 billion, and it's growing year in and year out. Now check this out. The most common reason, they put, for airport currency seizures is a failure to report internationally with $10,000 or more in cash or other currency as required by federal law. I would like to add, I've read the freaking Constitution a number of times, and I cannot find a single thing in there that authorizes the federal government to require you to tell them if you're leaving the country with more than $10,000 cash or more than $1 in cash, for that matter. They go further. This is from Jennifer McDonald, a senior research analyst at IJ, and she was the author of the report. She says, such paperwork violations account for half of all currency seizures. Half of them. Half of currency seizures of the 30,000 have just been paperwork violations. Most people don't know every of the tens of thousands of federal regulations on the books, and I've got some interesting examples that show how this plays out, and they really go after people in an aggressive way in just very unfortunate circumstances. It's half of all seizures and a quarter of the total value seized. More than $500 million. So $500,000 over that just one period, or $500 million over that period, where they just take it and keep it. And of course, you know what civil asset forfeiture is. You basically flip due process on its head, and instead of being innocent until proven guilty, they're charging, in essence, the property with the crime, and then you have to prove that it wasn't part of criminal activity. And anytime you have more than $10,000, they're basically taking the assumption that you're probably some kind of drug runner. So more than half of all seizures and over a quarter of the value seized, more than $500 million, McDonald writes, most without a demonstrated connection to any serious criminal activity. Just not anything to do with this. So here are some examples, if I can get this page loaded. This is from over at reason.com. Oops, it's reloading. I apologize for that. Here's an example from someone named Rustam Kazazi. This is a U.S. citizen who tried in 2018 to get on a plane to return to his native Albania from Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. He had roughly $58,000 in cash in his luggage. So $58,000, he's flying to his native Albania. He's a U.S. citizen. Money that he said he was taking to repair a house he owned and possibly buy another. Who knows if he's renting it, using it as income, maybe for family. Maybe he wants a getaway spot because we're living in a developing totalitarian nightmare. I don't know. It's not up to me to know why someone's going somewhere with cash. Owning money or owning products isn't a crime. And people on the left and right have turned a blind eye to this idea of nonviolent criminal prosecution of people just for owning things. So if you own the wrong plant, you should go to jail. If you own the wrong, that's for one side. The right for many years have told us if you own cannabis, you should go to jail just for owning it, not what you do with it. Not if you hurt people, harm people, rip somebody off, but you should go to jail for owning something. And on the left, of course, they tell us you should go to jail if you have the wrong gun. And so many people comply with that, unfortunately. But if you have the wrong firearm that isn't authorized, then of course you should just go to jail. Not if you do something bad with it, but just for the pure ownership. And that's the same mentality that they're taking at the airport. So every time you support one of these types of prohibitions, you're giving them the intellectual and legal foundation to do it on other issues. So merely owning cash and carrying it to your native country is going to get you arrested. $58,000 cash he had in his luggage. Money he said was taken to repair a house. He was strip searched by customs agents who also seized his life savings. They took it all. This is his life savings. The agency claimed the cash was involved in a smuggling, drug trafficking, money laundering operation, despite there being no proof of it. None. Customs failed. And then after this is all said and done, there was no proof of this. They just say it, of course, because they like getting that out there. They like putting out the press release saying that they're protecting people, but they're generally lying. Remember, for your security generally means another way to rip you off. So they failed to file a claim against the money within the 90-day deadline for federal forfeiture. So even though they made this claim, they made this guy look out to be a bad guy. I'm sure, can you imagine if you're getting arrested? This is a felony charge for doing this, mind you. I think it's like a 5-year felony for trying to take more than $10,000 cash out of the country without telling the government you're doing this. They really want to go out of their way to prevent people from escaping if they need to, I guess. And this is a great example, a great reason for cryptocurrency, which I think should be its own episode at some point as I'm learning more and more about it. But this is a way, unconfiscatable assets are very important that you don't have to carry physically. Anyways, they didn't even file the claim against their money. They took the money for the 90 days. They didn't actually file the claim for the forfeiture so they can take and hold it. And then in order to keep it forever, they got to do it within 90 days. They didn't do that. And then after the 90 days, they still failed to return his money. They just didn't return it. They're either supposed to say, well, now we've got criminal charges on you, or we've got this claim for forfeiture because we have a lower standard under civil process to take the money and keep it. And then they didn't do that. And then even though they didn't do it, they refused to give the money back. So luckily he was able to get some support from some legal foundation. I'm not sure if it was Institute for Justice or somebody else, but after almost an entire year battle, they finally agreed to return the money. They just kept the money, but Kazazi says they actually kept $770 out of that. I'm going to go with his side on this, not the government, because government can't be trusted. People who are willing to steal stuff from people like this, I don't trust anything they're saying. I'm just going to knee-jerk reaction, default trusting that guy. They ended up giving the money back, but they kept like $770. Here's another example. Man, I didn't get this page. Okay, this is a lady named Antonio Noirori. I apologize if I get the name wrong. This is a 59-year-old grandmother who lives in Katy. It's a Houston suburb. She's been flying to Nigeria once a year since 2014 to operate a free week-long medical clinic in Imo State where she grew up. She goes back to her home. So this is the immigrant success story. You work your way through, you go through the process, you build a life in a new country, you develop some success, and then what you do, you go back home and you try to build up your own people from where you came from, your family, your friends, your neighbors, where you grew up. This is to me, this is a very courageous story. This is a hero, this woman here. So she saved up a bunch of money and she flies there once a year to run this medical clinic to help people out in a very poor area. She dreamed, according to the Reason Report, she dreamed of opening a permanent clinic there, and over several years saved about $30,000 to build one on land donated by her father. So she saved up a bunch of money. On the day she was stopped by customs at Houston's George Bush Intercontinental Airport, what a name for it, she was carrying that money plus another $3,000, so $33,000. The extra $3,000, she said, was to help relatives with medical bills and to cover her travel and living expenses during the trip. She also had $7,400 that her brother was sending to relatives there. None of that's illegal, but failing to report the money is. And here from Reason, they point out that willfully failing to file the form is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. So here's a 59-year-old grandmother who immigrated to the United States, and those of you who are like, well, she just should have just known the law, you know, to hell with you, to be honest with you, because this is not the person that you target. If you're really supposed to be getting violent criminals, just do that. But they never seem to do that, so I don't even trust them to do that in the first place. And I can't even imagine a constitutional reason why any founder would ever have authorized. Could you imagine during the founding generation that if they had said, you know, we're only going to ratify this Constitution as long as the new federal government, the proposed federal government, will be able to arrest people for taking money back to their home country and to help people out, or for any reason. Doesn't even, you could just end it. If they have too much money, they can get arrested for not filing paperwork. I don't think anyone would have actually supported ratification of that Constitution. They certainly did not support that Constitution because that was never authorized in the first place. Now back over to Institute for Justice. They say, indeed, only 1 in 10 cases involving a reporting violation leads to an arrest. So if like half of these are failure to do a form, and then only 1 of 10 actually end up in an arrest. And a second offense, they say, such as drug trafficking or money laundering, is even alleged only 0.3% of the time. Less than 1% of the time is there even an alleged drug trafficking, much less a conviction. This suggests, they write, that even when something more serious than a mere paperwork violation is alleged, offenses are rarely egregious enough, or the government's evidence is rarely strong enough to warrant arrest, let alone prosecution. So why are they still stealing the money? Because that's what government does. Going further at Institute for Justice, further underscoring the lack of an apparent link to serious criminal activity, their report, Jetway Robbery, which is so appropriately titled, finds that 91% of seized currency that is ultimately forfeited is processed under civil rather than criminal procedures. And the reason they do that is because there's a lower bar. Civil means they don't have to prove any crime. They don't have to allege that there's a crime. They just have to have a low bar standard of assuming that this was actually the proceeds of criminal activity. They say no one had to be convicted for the government to keep the cash. 91%. No one had to be involved or convicted in any criminal activity. On average, and for those of them who actually are able to get their money back, most people actually do not, and I'll get to that in just a moment. On average, they say, it takes 193 days for currency to be forfeited after it's seized. So that whole process, the average is 190 days, leaving property owners in legal limbo for more than 6 months. And if you're talking about someone who saves up has their life savings, or is trying to help family, or whatever it may be, is getting on a plane for plans, maybe they had off of work for 2-3 weeks or something like that. People that I've known over the years who've traveled internationally for family, generally it's like 3, 4, 5 weeks. You spend all that time with family, and then you've had to get approval from your job to take off of work. You've made arrangements to take care of your home, your pets, whatever it may be. And think of just the logistic inconvenience to be like, well, now I don't have the cash to do this. Okay, well, maybe they shouldn't have had cash in the first place. Well, how someone decides to spend their money, let's say they don't want to put it in the rip-off banking system, maybe they prefer a different method. Maybe there's transfer issues once they get to their home country or wherever they're visiting. It isn't up to us to make that determination, but government likes tracking everything that everybody does, and that's why they want to restrict. This is a surveillance issue and a control issue on their part. So it takes 6 months, 6 months for people to actually like deal with this. In one case, they point out 15 years elapsed between seizure and forfeiture. 15 years. Here again from the report, I'm actually just digging right into it. It's a PDF. I think it's like 15 pages, something like that. I will link to it in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. They point out that even when property owners do make it to court, even in that situation, which isn't really often, it's only 7% of the civil forfeiture cases, they are at a significant disadvantage. People facing civil forfeiture of their property are not entitled to legal representation. If they cannot afford an attorney one will not be provided to them. So if you've got a situation where someone's been saving up for 5-6 years or for their whole life, all of their money, and then that's all taken away, and then they have to find an attorney, what's going to happen? Either they're going to get lucky and an organization like IJ.org, Institute for Justice, is going to hear about it and then offer to represent them for free through the donations and support of their organization. They're going to put themselves on the line to help people out in this situation. Either they're going to have that, or they're just out of luck. Too bad. Government's going to keep it. And that's really how it plays out. And then they point out that, moreover, the government must only demonstrate that property is more likely than not tied to criminal activity. This standard, known as a preponderance of the evidence, is a far cry from the beyond a reasonable doubt standard required in criminal cases. So they do it under civil asset forfeiture because they have this whole other process. They can lower the standard. They don't have to really prove. They just say it's more likely than not. A 51% chance, well, we can keep the money. Too bad. And then maybe they don't even think that. Then they let the time limit, the 90 days, expire. Then they don't give the money back anyways. And they're in a situation where they're basically taking stuff, bullying people who can't defend themselves, they don't have the financial means, and really ripping people off in horrible, horrible ways. And they go further, and this is the last piece that I'll cover from this. Thus, property owners are left to choose between paying thousands of dollars they may not have to hire an attorney or navigating the daunting federal court system without one. There is also a third choice: walking away. Unsurprisingly, many owners choose to simply cut their losses, generally leading to the administrative forfeiture of their property. They just can't get it back, period. Now, of course, we know that CBP isn't the only one that is doing this. We also have here from another article over at Reason that I will link over in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. In 2016, a USA Today investigation, they point out, found that the DEA seized more than $209 million from at least 5,200 travelers in 15 airports over that previous 10 years. A 2017 report by the Justice Department Office of Inspector General found that the DEA seized more than $4 billion in cash from people suspected of drug activity over the previous decade. This is another example. I talk about how the drug war is really the tentacles that get into everything else, from domestic and foreign policy, from gun control to surveillance to asset forfeiture, and many times to foreign wars and military establishments that shouldn't exist. This is one of the excuses that we're often given. 3.2 billion of that 4 billion. People are like, well, they're drug runners, they're criminals, they're violent. But 3.2, what is that? On my math, I went to government school, so I wasn't taught to actually think on my own. So my math is pretty bad. I had to learn some of this stuff on the outside, I guess. 3.2 out of $4 billion. What is that? 75%? Wait, that's 80%, I guess. 80% of those seizures were never connected to any criminal charges. So they take $4 billion, 80%, no criminal charges. They don't even have enough evidence to charge anybody, so they just keep it anyways. The majority of seizures occurred in airports, train stations, and bus terminals. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, this is kind of the overview of what's going on. I do encourage you to read the article, the couple of articles that I have linked here that I'll put in the show notes, plus the overview article from Institute for Justice, plus the full PDF report. I will include all of that in the show notes. But if you really want to learn about asset forfeiture, or if you want to brush up, there are 2 episodes that I strongly recommend. First of all, this one from last June 17, 2019, Asset Forfeiture is Theft, an overview of state and federal programs. There's state asset forfeiture, and then there's federal asset forfeiture, and then there's also the Federal Equitable Sharing Program, which is used to convince local law enforcement to bypass any state restrictions on forfeiture and act as federal agents for the national government, for the empire, which they aren't authorized to be doing in the first place. And then this other episode I think is actually really important that I just did a few months ago in looks like 2 months ago, May 22nd, 2020, how asset forfeiture drives the police state, how it distorts law enforcement priorities and encourages, like I was just saying, how it encourages local law enforcement to act as federal agents. And I just want to sum this up, and I think the property rights and discussion from leading founders and revolutionaries is so important. There are so many great quotes on property. I did an episode on that I don't have the link for a little while ago, but here from Arthur Lee, I covered this in my property rights, founders on property rights episode in the last few months, and he put it this way. In 1775, the right of property is the guardian of every other right. And to deprive a people of this is, in fact, to deprive them of their liberty. In essence, if we turn a blind eye to the notion that government can take people's property for not having a form for carrying their property to another country, across a border, whatever it may be, just who knows how they're going to apply that in the future? Will it be applied across state lines? Will it be applied just to cash in general because they want to track everything that you do? Who knows? Someone in the future is going to build on this unconstitutional power and use it in even worse ways in the future. And that's why I think the work of organizations like Institute for Justice are so important. We certainly follow their lead. I know we've done a lot of work on asset forfeiture here at TAC, but there is really no one better and more consistent on this than IJ.org. Well, I hope you guys found this really interesting. It should piss you off. It's really bad. As Lewis Stubbs said over in the live chat, asset forfeiture is theft. Plain and simple. It could be highway robbery. I don't know. We don't need to one-up each other, but you're absolutely right, Lewis. Funky Euphemism points out they don't even know how many laws there are. There are so many federal law attempts to count and catalog have been tried. Attempts to count and catalog have been tried, and generally it was too much to simply count the laws. How can every single person, how can the 59-year-old grandmother know, even if she knows that she may have to file a form when she comes back in and make a declaration because she's reading that form when she flies back into the country, as she's done every single year? Can you think of her experience? I fly to another country, I come back, and when I come back, every time I do this annual trip back to my home state, then I have to fill out a form to declare what I'm bringing back. But I'm never told I have to do that on the way out. So she's probably, if you just think logistically and you think logically about this, she wouldn't even expect that she has to do a form. No one's telling you. There's no signs, no nothing. You just have to somehow know. And that's why that book, 3 Felonies a Day, is probably so important to read, because every one of us is probably committing federal felonies all the time because you can't keep track of all this stuff. Patricia Dance says the government has nothing on the mob. I just watched an interesting 3-part documentary about the mob in New York City recently. And yeah, it really is the same thing. And if we're supposedly protected from criminal activity by the largest criminal enterprise in the history of our existence. Kevin says, so now the government can just take your money for no good reason? And absolutely. And they think the good reason is that you haven't checked a box. You haven't told them you had that money. They want to know if you're trying to get away so they can tax you. Larry Clark, yes, it pisses me off like most of what the government does. Yeah, I mean, most of what they do shouldn't exist at all. Jason Chaney, I apologize if I get your name wrong. This has been a scam across numerous agencies for decades. And you're absolutely right. It isn't just Customs. It isn't just ICE. It isn't just DHS. It isn't just the DEA, but it's basically every federal agency and every state and local agency. And that's why we work so hard to restrict civil asset forfeiture on a state level, because it's not going to happen at the federal level. We work to do it on a state level, and then we work to get states to opt out of this. Now, how to deal with this at the airport, I don't know. Off the top of my head, my gut instinct is there is no state nullification effort that really, at least in the current climate, that can work. I like Timothy Martin. I always appreciate your comments, Tim. The standard seems to be, you have it, we want it, we take it. That's a great way to sum it up, and I think that's a good way to end this episode. I will read through the rest of the chat, the comments a little bit later on, both live and in the archive. So if you support the show, you enjoyed this, you learned something, that's more important than anything, please consider doing a few things that are totally free, totally simple, totally fast, and help us spread the word. Smashing the like button on any platform you're on, leaving a review on iTunes, Podbean, or any podcast platform, subscribing on YouTube, wherever you can subscribe, get notifications, all of these things, and especially the comments too. All of these things, when you share links, comments, it actually triggers the easily triggered algorithm of the platform you happen to watch or listen on most of those platforms, especially the mainstream ones. And it tells that algorithm to show the program to more people. So I'm very grateful for those of you who are engaging, watching the show, sharing, leaving comments. And of course, if you really want to get behind us, there are a number of you who are out there. I'm not going to like dox people, but I'm very grateful for those of you who I see who are members, both monthly and annual members. I see a 5-year member out there, a lifetime. Without your financial support, without your financial faith behind our work, there's no way we could get this work done. There's no way we could continue reaching more and more people. So please consider joining us. Don't feel obligated. I'm going to continue doing this show no matter what. We've got over 10,000 articles and blogs and videos and podcasts on our website over the years. We're going to continue doing that and sharing the information. But if you do have the means and you can support us and you can pitch in a couple of bucks a month or more, we'd be very grateful. 10thamendmentcenter.com/members is where you go to do that. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Again, thank you so much for being here. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope your week is off to a good start. And I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.